Welcome, everyone. I'm Chris Sumrick, Executive Director of Humanities Nebraska, and this is our latest edition of Humanities at Home Live, and I'm going to try to bring up the feed right now. And thanks for joining us on this cloudy day. It's hard to believe a week ago, I think we still had a white blanket of snow on the ground, but then by afternoon it was melted and green, and then it's been nice and sunny, this part of the state at least lately until today. So yeah, it's a lunch hour. So if you've got your lunches ready and you just kick back and just enjoy a little bit of interaction with our Nebraska State Poet, Matt Mason, and I will introduce Matt in just a moment. Again, Chris Sumrick from Humanities Nebraska, and our mission as an organization is to try to connect people all across the state with the humanities and with each other, and usually that involves everybody being together in person, and of course that's not possible right now. So we've been adapting our work in different ways, and your Humanities Nebraska staff's been working really hard on that, and we really just miss seeing you all in person. And seeing you at humanities programs and being able to interact with everybody that way. But it's been really fun the last few weeks to interact with people through social media and just calling each other one-on-one. And you probably have had your share of Zoom meetings if you're working out there much right now. But anyway, we are just grateful to be able to do what we can to continue to put the humanities in front of all Nebraskans and think about the things that enrich our lives as humans. And so Humanities Nebraska is a nonprofit, and we are funded through a combination of the National Endowment for the Humanities, and we do receive appropriation from the Nebraska legislature. Individual and organizational donors, private donations are one of our most important sources of funding. So thank you all to those of you who are supporting us. And also thanks to the Nebraska Cultural Endowment, a really important partnership between Nebraska Arts Council and Humanities Nebraska and funding the arts and humanities across the state. So this program today is, I believe, the third in our series of Humanities at Home Live. And we're going to encourage you to ask questions on social media, on Facebook. And Erica Hamilton, our Director of Literary Programs for Humanities Nebraska, is on hand as well. And Erica will be helping field questions. This is right up her alley. She plays a really important role with Humanities Nebraska in our partnership with the Arts Council and the Library Commission and the Governor for the State Poet program. So you'll hear from Erica in a little bit. And we would like you, as you ask questions and make comments, to maybe share where you're from. Since this is Humanities at Home, it's nice to see where people are, where home is for you. So look forward to seeing that from you. And I think with that, I'll just go ahead and introduce our guest today, Matt Mason. Matt is the Nebraska State Poet, and he is Executive Director of the Nebraska Writers Collective. He runs poetry programming for the State Department. He's worked in Nepal, Romania, Botswana, and Belarus in that role. He's a recipient of a Pushcart Prize for his poem, Notes for My Daughter Against Chasing Storms, an excellent one. And his work can be found in numerous magazines and anthologies, including Ted Cruz's American Life and Poetry. He's the author of Things We Don't Know, and also The Baby That Ate Cincinnati. And he's based in Omaha with his wife, poet Sarah McKinstry Brown, another marvelous poet, I might add, and his daughters, Sophia and Lucia. And so, Matt has been state poet now for, he's going into his second year, and in his first year, he did something like close to 130 programs all across the state, and he hit, I believe, 27 different counties. One of the things that his goal was when he was in the running for state poet was to hit every Nebraska county. And I think he's added a couple already this year, and we can get more into that in a moment. But with that, I'd like to introduce Nebraska State Poet Matt Mason, and just start it off with a question for Matt. Maybe you could just share with us a little bit. Let's talk poetry, and let's talk what got you into poetry, your journey into that world, and just what draws you to poetry. So, Matt Mason.
Thank you, Chris. And it's a real pleasure to be here. It's an honor. I'm nothing but a fan for Humanities Nebraska and all you do in the state. Poetry for me started, a little bit in grade school when teachers would tell us to write things, and I would be the kid writing the weird poems, usually about aliens attacking the school. But I kind of, in high school, started writing a little bit more just about what was going on with me emotionally. And it just helped me figure out the world a little bit better, writing about it, taking time to work something through on a piece of paper. And that stayed with me. I kept writing, had some things published, and it just is something that I love doing. I love spending time on, and I don't know. I think it makes me a better person. Helps me understand the world better. Helps me understand myself better. So I think it's always been fantastic for me in my life.
And so you're an Omaha boy, right?
Yep.
Do I remember correct? So I believe I met you, gosh, it's been close to a decade ago. I've just seen you around the state over the years. And I think maybe one of the first times I met you was in McCook at the Buffalo Common Storytelling Festival quite a few years ago. So I think it seems one of the things that's impressive in your work, not only as state poet, but before, is your connection, your work traveling around the state. And I just wonder if you could share a little bit about your observations about the poet community in Nebraska.
I love being able to travel around Nebraska and meet the poets from different places. I kind of started with that when I moved back to Omaha with a master's degree in creative writing, and would go to poetry readings and the Nebraska Book Festival, the Nebraska Literature Festival at the time even, and catch poets from Chadron and Norfolk and Wayne and Winside, all over the state. Because there are so many amazing writers from the Sandhills to the Missouri, and it's not like there's one kind of poetry for the state. But one thing I really like about Nebraska is that there are a lot of poets who write poems that appeal to me, that tell stories that are understandable on one read, but then you read a second time and you find more and more and more. Poets like, Deb Carpenter Nolting, or J.V. Brummels, or Barbara Schmitz, or Zadika Poindexter, Michelle Trox-Clair. There's so many amazing poets who are also, really engaging for a reader or an audience.
I didn't mention earlier that you're in our Speakers Bureau as part of being state poet, and you're also in the Nebraska Arts Council touring artist roster. So it's great to have poets like you in both the arts and the humanities councils, getting you guys around the state and doing different programming. And some of the people you mentioned are part of that. And I'm just curious, I know that this spring you were, you had a number of different programs scheduled out in Western Nebraska, and just how have you adapted? I don't know about you, but I love going out to the western part of the state and roaming around. And so I'm just wondering, how have you been adapting to that and doing programs in other ways?
I've been trying it's hard. I love travel anyway. I love getting around the state. I love driving. I get great ideas when I travel do a lot of more writing, I think, when I'm on the road. And I was supposed to be in the Panhandle twice. Supposed to be out in first McCook, up to Alliance, over to the fossil beds, a couple trips to Chadron, Scottsbluff, that have all, of course, were canceled, and still trying to figure out how to make up for some of these. But one of them was a reading in Scottsbluff for Western Nebraska Community College and a class of Deb Carpenter's, and we put up a YouTube video to be used for the class and for the reading in the college, just of a reading and a Q&A. I solicited questions on Facebook and answered them in the video. So yeah, just kind of trying to figure out different ways to to reach people and to also just to help entertain folks. It's there's more than Netflix. There's a lot of good poetry video out there, and which is one of the great things that I think a lot of poets are doing too. Is I'm seeing open mics for poetry through Zoom or whatever. Or there's a poet in Boston, Adam Stone, who's been randomly through the day doing poetry readings from people's books and talking about different poets, and just having open mics. It's kind of neat to see the creativity that people are bringing to getting poetry out there.
Well, and speaking of creativity, you mentioned how you get creative ideas just being out on the road. And so I'm wondering, can you talk a little bit about what your creative process is like and how you get this creative spark for your own writing?
Yeah, for my own writing, I've had a schedule ever since I was an undergrad, where I took a class where we had to turn in a poem every week for 10 weeks on Monday night. So ever since 1990, I've kept that deadline, and I have to have a new poem every week. So I'm at least working on one thing a week, and it's great to have that assignment because it means I'm looking for things to write about. Instead of waiting for poems to come to me, I'm seeking them out, and you find them. And sometimes at the end of the deadline, I've got nothing that week, think I don't have anything to write about, but I sit down and I write, and sometimes something kind of magical happens. So having that deadline has helped. And actually over the past few weeks, I run a nonprofit that had events canceled. I'm supposed to be extremely busy this time of year normally, and kind of all the bandwidth of my head is on work, and it's hard to write. But these past few weeks has been much different. I've had actual free time. I've had time to be thinking about writing, and I've written a lot. And it's been good for me. It's like I said before, it helps me process the world and figure things out. And there's a lot to process and a lot to try to figure out. So the arts are amazing tools for that, whether you're a poet or a storyteller or a songwriter or a painter. This is a time, we're not all going to be Shakespeare writing, the best plays during the whatever pandemic that people are talking about. But there is, hopefully it'll help us in some ways get through this.
This seems like a perfect spot to maybe ask you if there's anything you'd be willing to read right now. Whether I've seen you read some fantastic stuff in different venues, and I don't know whether you want to float something new or go back to something you've done in the past, but love to hear something.
Sure. I think so this it's kind of middle. It's not new, it's not old yet. I've got a book coming out at some point this year. It's called I Have a Poem the Size of the Moon, and it's mostly poems about Nebraska, more the cities than the out of city areas. But so I figure I'll read the title poem from this book that's hopefully coming out this year. Who knows what's actually going to happen, though. This is a little different. So it's called I Have a Poem the Size of the Moon. I have a poem the size of the moon right here in my shirt pocket. It is brilliant in more ways than just a reflection of sunlight. And every one of you wants me to unfold it and read it to you right now. It will only take 3.2 years to reach the conclusion. There will be no intermission. Please hold your applause to the end.
Fantastic. And it's just one thing I marvel at with you and other poets that are so great at reading is the use of space in your reading, and it's a work of art. So thank you for sharing that, and maybe we'll get to other ones as we go. But I think we have it's time to bring Erica Hamilton into this, because I believe she has a question from our Facebook Live feed.
Great.
Yes, we do have a question from Ellen Lyric. She's in Alliance, and I'm sure, Matt, she's looking forward to meeting you when you're up there eventually. But Ellen, she asks, has Matt written a poem with the coronavirus and its effects as a theme?
Well, thanks, Ellen. And I really look forward to getting to Alliance. And I'm still disappointed I wasn't able to be there a couple weeks ago. I've written a fair amount of poetry, not so much about the virus itself, but about the social distancing and kind of the effects that I've seen just in my life and in my home. I'm very fortunate and I haven't been strongly affected by the actual virus itself. My family is safe and healthy. So I haven't written as much on the actual illness yet, but it's obviously there tinging all the poems about social distancing and being at home and the fear kind of hanging over all of us. You can see a lot of them on my Facebook Nebraska State Poet Matt Mason page. I've been posting some mostly a couple weeks ago.
Matt, that reminds me earlier on when you were talking about seeing different poets cite or get on YouTube or whatever throughout the day and do works as we're all social distancing and everything. And I've seen the same in music. There's just fantastic, musicians out there playing from their couches, and it just reminds me of that just importance of art nourishing the soul. And so I'm curious, kind of following up too on your own creative process. So as we've been in this kind of really strange, different situation over the last weeks, has your process been different, or have you found yourself moving a direction in how you write poetry that you wouldn't have otherwise?
It's mostly, it's kind of trying to figure out what everything going on in the world really means on a personal level. I don't want to take other people's stories and write about tragedy and death, because I don't feel that at this point. I mean, we all can. We write fiction. We put ourselves in other shoes. But I think it is such a hard time. It's a weird time for me. I think the hardest part is how strange it is to feel so unaffected and so free in my home right now, whereas others are dealing with really the worst tragedy there is, and trying to balance that emotion and the certain amount of guilt of having the benefit of free time and a little bit of a lighter work day all of a sudden, and spending time with my kids and all that. I think that's the hardest part, is I think processing those really disparate and difficult aspects of what this is bringing to the country.
I think we can all relate to that in some shape or form, whether it's in some creative pursuit or just otherwise in our lives. That's a great point. Let's switch gears a little bit, looking at the banner behind you for Nebraska Writers Collective, and Humanities Nebraska has given several grants to Nebraska Writers Collective over the years, specifically for the Louder Than a Bomb program in particular. I know that's not the only thing you do, but I just wonder if you could give kind of a snapshot of your work in Nebraska Writers Collective, and also Louder Than a Bomb, which is just a remarkable program. That Eric and I have both been to several times, and just I think you can do the best job, of course, describing that for people who haven't seen it before. But could you share about those two things?
Well, thank you. Yeah, I've been executive director of the Nebraska Writers Collective for a little over 10 years now. And It's been fantastic being able to spread poetry in schools and lately prisons and communities, all that. Louder Than a Bomb is our biggest program, and it works in more than 40 high schools all around the state, mostly Omaha and Lincoln, but we're also in Norfolk, North Platte, Ogallala, Hastings. So we get around teaching creative writing to junior high and high school poets with the program, and having a competition in the spring. And of course, though the competition was canceled this year, we had the program running since August in most schools, teaching creative writing, helping kids, write about their lives, write about their communities, write about the world. And it's been fun. It's been amazing to see. And Humanities Nebraska has been a great supporter of us, this year, helping us with our touring artist program. And we were able to bring in a number of amazing poets to town. Scott Woods from Ohio and Joaquin Zihuatanejo from Texas most recently. And so it's great to have supporters like Humanities Nebraska and all the others who help us out, who understand, the value. It's kind of hard to sell. It's like we're teaching high school poetry, which is kind of a tough sell, I think. Poetry, most people remember their own high school experiences of not liking poetry. I didn't like poetry when I was in high school, so I learned. But it's great to have everybody who really understands what we're doing, because it's more than teaching poetry. It's more than teaching creative writing. It's it's communication, it's processing, it's psychology, it's everything. So
yeah. Well, I'll say from a funder's point of view, it's easy to support a project that's just so awesome. So yeah, no hard decision there. And I'll just also add from my own experience, and I don't know what else Erica would add, but on Louder Than a Bomb, the thing about getting beyond just the fact that it's poetry, when I see those high school students up on the stage by themselves behind the mic with a sweaty crowd of a couple hundred kids cheering them on and delivering this poetry, I think that kid is prepared for so many different things in life through that experience. The confidence building, the energy of the whole thing. And so it's hard to put a specific measure on it, but it's really just a remarkable thing for them in terms of just multiple things it can mean to their lives going forward. So that's my pitch for it anyway.
That's a good pitch. Now, I appreciate it.
I believe we have a couple questions queued up now. So Erica, why don't you take it?
Yeah, and I will piggyback on the whole Louder Than a Bomb thing. I've seen that in so many different aspects as both an employee of Humanities Nebraska. I've judged a couple of those competitions, which is always fun, and I don't mind being booed. And as a parent, when my own middle school kid was part of a team and seeing how much fun those kids had with that. We have a question from Marianne Reynolds saying, "Hi, Matt. We're looking forward to having you read from your new book at Nyhart Day this August. I'm wondering about the teachers who inspired you. Who taught the poetry class that you referred to? When you think about the teachers that inspired you, what qualities did they have?"
Oh man, the teachers that inspired me just have passion for the subject. That's what really has caught on to me. When I was just at college, I had a teacher who taught a poetry class, and I was just coming from high school. I was still a little bit hesitant about poetry, but I'd been writing poetry, so I really wanted to learn more about it. And there was this teacher who was just absolutely passionate about it, who was unashamedly energetic and interested about the subject. And I think that's what the best teachers do, even if they don't have a, a monumental grasp of poetry. I mean, everybody's got a few poems that have touched them in their life, and you talk about those poems, let students see how you are interested in it and how this poem talks to you in a special way. I mean, it takes a little bit of vulnerability, to let people know it's like, hey, this is amazing and I love it, and I'm going to tell you about it, and you may not love it, but tough. So that is really what helped me initially find my own passion for poetry.
Erica, go ahead if you had a second question, go ahead and.
I do. I have a couple more questions. This is from Amy Sandine in Hastings. She says, I am continually impressed, Matt, by your inspiring work with young poets in Nebraska and elsewhere. Can you tell us what and who we can watch for and how we can support young poets, especially now?
Wow. Helping young poets is something about just being supportive. And it's something where maybe you can go to open mics or hold open mics, or find interested businesses to give prizes to the schools for some kind of poetry project. And it's just kind of letting students know that you're interested in their writing, you're interested in what they're saying. I think a lot of students are writing poetry that's, it's not Shakespeare yet because they're just figuring things out. But when you really look at these poems that students are writing, as they figure out the craft, they get better and better. And it's helping them at those initial stages that really help them continue on so that they get better and better. It's just giving positive feedback and helping them improve, and showing them again the poets that inspire you. Talk about them with students.
Following up on that, Matt, we also have a question from Wendy Hill Smith asking if you have any advice for young writers and poets.
Yeah, well, the basic advice for young writers is really the same advice for any writers, in that read a lot of poetry and write a lot of poetry. Find the poets that you like, pick up anthologies and thumb through, or literary magazines. There's a great one, Plain Songs, out of Hastings, in Hastings College, is a great selection of poets in every issue. And don't worry if you read a poem and you're not sure what you're reading or what it's about, or it doesn't speak to you. That's fine. Go on to the next poem. I think sometimes we feel that we're supposed to love all poetry, or we don't understand it. It's like, no, there's a lot of poetry I don't understand. There's a lot of poets I don't understand. There are a lot of poets I don't like, because poetry is like music. We kind of think of poetry as this monolithic one thing, but it's 100 different genres, just like music. So we don't yell at people who don't like Travis Tritt that clearly they hate all music, but somehow if you don't like T.S. Eliot, you don't like poetry. It's like, no, that's not true. Find the ones you like, find the ones you don't like. And even the ones we don't necessarily enjoy reading, we learn from. William Carlos Williams is not my favorite poet as someone whose books I'll pick up and read, but he's taught me more about line breaks than any other poet. There's a lot of value. There's a lot of good craft going on, whether it's going to be something we adopt or not. So yeah, for young poets, read a lot, figure out what you like, figure out what you don't like, and then just write. Even if it's, never succumb to the concept of writer's block. Let yourself write a terrible poem. It's okay. Some days we need to practice. It's no different than basketball or piano or ukulele or any of that. You have to sit and practice. And the good thing about poetry is if you write bad poems, you can burn them.
I would have a big stack to burn, Matt. I have to just say that. uh, so, I mean, that's like one of the things I was thinking about the reason somebody like me is intimidated by poetry is the idea of where, oh, whatever I write will be bad, you know, because I don't know what makes a good poem. And so it resonates with me that you said poetry is like music and it's not monolithic and maybe there's not one right way and so forth. But within that, I mean, Erica just mentioned she judges for yeah, for Louder Than a Bomb. And I know that's interesting too. I mean, so you're probably judging in that case both the poem itself and the delivery, and you can talk about that. But I guess just both in reciting poetry and writing poetry, I mean, can you talk at all about any parameters for what is quote unquote good, what makes for a good poem?
Yeah, I mean, for me, a good poem is something that captures what I hope it'll capture. Some element of my life, some experience, so that when I put that poem away and pick it up a year later, I relive that in a similar way. If I can do that, if I can get the details right, the wording right, that's magical. It may not be something that's going to be published in a literary magazine, because most of the poems that I wrote when I was first writing, you know, in high school and college, I'm not telling anybody. I'm not showing those to anybody. They're not anything that I think anybody else is necessarily going to get something from, but they're good poems for me. They're time capsules of what I was going through or what I was seeing, um, in a really specific and special way. So, you know, your good poems may not be somebody else's good poems, and that's fine. But going back to poetry being kind of a tough thing to nail down, what is good and what isn't good. After I was in college, I was writing poetry. I was writing a lot of poetry, and I would pick up books. I wasn't in school. I wanted to keep learning. So I'd pick up a book. It's like, oh, this won this big award. It must be good poetry. And I would read it. And if I didn't like the book, it made me doubt if what I was writing was even poetry, more and more, because it seemed like all the award-winning books were nothing like what I was writing. And then, you know, eventually you find the poets, though, that do write similar to you. So for a while there, I was not sure if what I wrote could even be called poetry anymore, until I found poets like Galway Kinnell and Denise Duhamel, and, you know, Bill Clefcorn and Twyla Hansen, really writing poetry that I could connect with and that, you know, reminded me of things that I wanted to do with poetry also.
I'm glad you mentioned Twyla Hansen and Bill Clefcorn. One thing I left out of your introduction is the fact that you're our third Nebraska State Poet, as opposed to John Neihart, who is a poet laureate in perpetuity as designated by the Nebraska legislature many, many years ago. And Bill Clefcorn, of course, was state poet for 26, 7 years, something like that, a long time until he passed away. And then Twyla Hansen was the first state poet post Bill Clefcorn, and with the new partnership of the Arts Council and Humanities Nebraska and the Library Commission. And so, yeah, that's you follow in some great footsteps there. Yeah. Would you mind just talking about what makes a good poem and your own thoughts about that? Would you mind reading something else? I know we're going to be winding up here pretty soon, so maybe reading one more would be great.
Sure. I'll read another poem from the book that's hopefully coming out soon. Yeah. So this poem, this is one of those poems that, you know, writing about trying to figure out the world. This is a poem. There was an article in the Omaha World Herald several years ago about an incident. It was like one of those 1-inch articles that had more than 1 inch of content. And I kept trying for follow-up, looking for what happened to this, because it's one of those weird stories that gets your interest and then you don't know what to do with. So I wrote this. It's called Flash, from an inch-long news story in the Omaha World Herald. 3 a.m. Naked man in Nebraska drives his truck through a church, sideswipes a school, ends up spinning on the state capitol's lawn. He's wearing nothing but rain and spotlights. His skin a living glitter ball across the grass. Stepped out a superstar. Blue-red paparazzi pulses flashing breakneck beats around the streetlight city. You can't publicize a show like this. Too much is the surprise of it that otherwise would keep you brewing coffee after bedtime so you could sneak to the church halfway to dawn, sit with the whole neighborhood, everybody here, the Presbyterians, the Baptists from the Red House, everybody squeezed in the balcony, meditating on the pair of candles far away as stars. Before the scene ignites, before a choir of rubber and internal combustion blazes up the aisle, slows like genuflection, screeches left at the altar, tips the holy bird bath, and parts the side doors like a sea. Mary just smiles. Jesus doesn't even turn his head. Not a soul notices how beautiful the Capitol building looks in this rain. Confetti of light beams, orange pickups spinning on the green, tires spraying mud across the cosmos. In such a funky town spectacle, you'd think the officers would move more like the YMCA dancers, leap like antelope, prowl like panthers, instead of such clumsy choreography where they fall on this slick fish naked highlight and beat his chin into the muck. They lie to the rain, saying, "That's it for the show. Nothing to see here. Get yourselves home."
Wow, that is inspiring. And just from a little tiny blurb in the paper, talk about creative spark. Where is that published, or is it published?
That one I can't remember. It will be in my book that's coming out this year. It got picked up by a small magazine, but I can't remember which one right now.
I will buy that book for that poem alone. So that's fantastic, Matt. Thank you. I think we're probably getting to the point where people are going to have to start thinking about getting back to work and everything. So kind of start winding down. But Matt, do you have any final comments or observations? I guess I'm wondering what you're thinking about. I know this year we're all kind of rethinking our goals and what we're up to, but is there anything you want to talk about that's in your horizon ahead?
Really, I'm just looking forward to getting out and around the state again, and doing it safely. As a diabetic, I am so grateful for everyone who is social distancing, who's taking this seriously, because my life, my wife's life, we're at risk. So I am so grateful for all the efforts everyone is going to right now. And I look forward to seeing people again. But I'd also like to point out that, what Chris said at the beginning about Humanities Nebraska, please donate to them. They do fantastic work supporting artists and supporting arts organizations. And in the year coming up, artists and arts organizations are potentially going to be overlooked, but they need to keep going. We need to still be making art, particularly right now, as a way of documenting this time. So I am so grateful to Humanities Nebraska and all the others who help keep the arts going.
Thank you, Matt. I appreciate that. And you're getting lots of love and comments on our Facebook feed. So a lot of appreciation for your work. And I couldn't agree with you more on the importance of the arts and humanities and all that to our communities as we go through what we're going through right now. I do want to take just a moment to share that anybody involved in arts and humanities organizations should be aware that we're going to be helping distribute funding. That there's a little bit of funding in that massive CARES Act legislation for the arts and humanities. And so the National Endowment for the Arts and National Endowment for the Humanities each had, I think, 75 million each, and then a chunk of that went out to all the state arts councils and state humanities councils. And so Nebraska Arts Council is in the process now of distributing funding to arts organizations, and Humanities Nebraska we're finalizing our guidelines right now, and we'll be announcing that whole process next week. And so just pay attention to Humanities Nebraska on social media, check our website. We're going to really try to push out any funding we can around the state to cultural organizations who need extra financial help in these challenging times when, you know, we don't have the normal sources of revenue that organizations have. And so, you know, the beautiful thing about Nebraska is we all work together and we get things done, and it's just a great state in so many different ways. And we are just happy to try to do anything we can to help in that regard. And I share your thoughts, Matt, about just can't wait to be back out there talking to people in person. We all look forward to that, to those times together in person. But it's great to spend this time with you and everybody else right now. I want to thank Erica Hamilton, our Director of Literary Programs, for helping on this, and Christy Hyatt Carley, one of our program managers, for doing a lot of the technical work on it, and our communications manager, Sherilyn Hansen, as well. And then the whole staff just really is thinking of you all, and we really appreciate your support of not only Humanities Nebraska, but all the other arts and humanities and cultural organizations in your local communities who need you at this time. So I think with that, we're done for the day. And Matt, we'll probably come back on somewhere down the road a little bit and do this again, and just keep the conversation going.
Great. Well, thanks for having me. This is a pleasure.